George Strait works undercover at a food truck and changes a family's destiny. The alarm clock screamed at 5:30 in the morning, but Mike Callahan was already awake. He had been staring at the ceiling for the past 2 hours, his mind racing with numbers that never seemed to add up right. Rent for the food truck spot, insurance payments, supplier bills, and now Sarah's medical expenses. Everything was crashing down like dominoes, and he was running out of moves to make. The Texas sun hadn't even begun to peek over the horizon, but Mike knew this Monday would be just like every other day lately, a desperate fight to keep his head above water. He rolled out of bed carefully, trying not to wake Sarah, who had finally fallen asleep after another restless night. The medication made her drowsy, but the pain still kept her tossing and turning until the early hours. Mike looked at her peaceful face and felt his chest tighten. 42 years old, and he felt like he was failing at everything that mattered most. The Texas Tastes food truck was supposed to be their salvation after he lost his restaurant management job during the pandemic. Instead, it was slowly becoming their downfall. Mike dressed quietly in his worn jeans and faded t-shirt, the same uniform he wore every day to work the truck. His reflection in the bathroom mirror showed a man who looked older than his years, stress lines etched deep around his eyes, and a 5 o'clock shadow that had become permanent because he couldn't remember the last time he had energy for a proper shave. He splashed cold water on his face and tried to summon the strength for another day of pretending everything was fine when customers asked how business was going. The drive to the food truck took 15 minutes through the quiet streets of Cedar Falls, Texas. This small town of 8,000 people had been his home for the past decade, and he knew every face, every story, every struggle. Everyone here worked hard for their money, and Mike respected that. That's why it hurt so much when he had to raise his prices last month. He saw the way Mrs. Henderson hesitated before ordering her usual lunch, counting the bills in her weathered hands twice before handing them over. Before you continue reading this incredible story, I want to ask you something important. If you're enjoying this tale of unexpected encounters and life-changing moments, please consider subscribing to our channel and hitting that notification bell. We share stories like this one that touch the heart and remind us that miracles can happen in the most ordinary places. Also, leave a comment below telling us where you're watching from and what you think about Mike's situation so far. Your engagement means the world to us and helps us bring you more amazing stories like this one. Mike unlocked the food truck and began his morning routine. Check the propane tanks, fire up the grill, prep the ingredients, and pray that today would bring enough customers to cover the basics. The bank had already called twice last week about the loan payment, and he had exactly 17 days before they could legally repossess the truck. 17 days to find a miracle or watch his family's future disappear on the back of a tow truck. As he chopped onions for the breakfast burritos, Mike's mind wandered to better times. 3 years ago, when he first bought the truck, Sarah had been so excited she helped him design the menu, painted the cheerful yellow and red logo on the side, and even suggested the name Texas Tastes, because she said his cooking captured the true spirit of their beloved state. Those first few months had been magical. Long lines of customers, positive reviews, and genuine hope that they were building something special together. Then came Sarah's diagnosis 6 months ago. Rheumatoid arthritis, the doctor had said. But not the mild kind, the aggressive type that required expensive medications and regular treatments to prevent permanent joint damage. Their insurance covered some of it, but the co-pays and deductibles were crushing them. Mike had looked into getting a second job, but the food truck demanded 14-hour days just to stay afloat. There wasn't time for anything else. The first customer arrived at 7 sharp. Bobby Martinez, who worked construction and always ordered 2 breakfast burritos and black coffee before heading to the job site. Bobby was one of the good ones, always paid exact change and never complained about anything. This morning, though, he looked concerned as he approached the service window. "Morning, Mike. You look tired, brother. Everything okay?" Mike forced a smile and started preparing Bobby's usual order. "Just the regular Monday morning blues, you know how it is. How's the construction business treating you?" Bobby leaned against the counter, his hard hat tucked under his arm. "Can't complain. Hey, I heard through the grapevine that you might be having some trouble with the truck. Is that true?" The question hit Mike like a punch to the gut. He had tried so hard to keep his financial problems private, but in a small town, secrets had a way of spreading like wildfire. He continued cooking, not trusting his voice to remain steady if he answered right away. "People talk too much in this town," Mike finally said, wrapping the burritos in foil with hands that trembled slightly. "Business has been slow, but we're managing." Bobby pulled out his wallet and handed Mike a $20 bill for a $12 order. "Keep the change, and don't even think about arguing with me. My wife makes twice what I do, and we're doing just fine. Sometimes we all need a little help from our neighbors." Mike stared at the 20, feeling tears threaten to form. "Bobby, I can't accept." "Yes, you can, and you will. That's what community means, Mike. We take care of each other." Bobby picked up his order and headed toward his truck. "Have a good day, and remember, things have a way of working out when you least expect it." As Bobby drove away, Mike stood there, holding the extra $8 and wondering how many more acts of kindness from struggling neighbors he could accept before his pride completely crumbled. He tucked the money into the cash register and tried to focus on the positive. One customer down, hopefully many more to go. The morning progressed with the usual steady trickle of regulars. Miss Annie ordered her senior coffee and colache, complaining about her arthritis, but always managing to find something to smile about. Tom Wright grabbed his usual bacon and egg sandwich before opening his hardware store down the street. Each familiar face was a small comfort in the storm of uncertainty that had become Mike's life. Around 10:30, during the morning lull, between breakfast and lunch rushes, Mike was cleaning the grill when he heard footsteps approaching. He looked up to see a man in a brown cowboy hat, dark sunglasses, and a neatly trimmed gray beard. The stranger was probably in his early 70s, wearing a simple button-down shirt and well-worn jeans. There was something about his presence that commanded attention without trying, a quiet confidence that came from years of experience and hard-earned wisdom. "Morning," the man said, his voice carrying a familiar Texas drawl. "Beautiful day, isn't it?" Mike nodded, wiping his hands on his apron. "Sure is. What can I get for you today?" The stranger studied the menu board for a moment, then looked directly at Mike with those hidden eyes. "Actually, I was wondering if you might need some help around here. I'm visiting family in town and find myself with some free time on my hands. Thought maybe I could lend a hand if you're short-staffed." Mike blinked in surprise. In 3 years of running the food truck, no one had ever walked up and offered to work for free. "I appreciate the offer, but I can't really afford to hire anyone right now. Business has been a little slow lately." The man smiled, and there was something genuinely warm about it. "Who said anything about hiring? I'm not looking for money, son. Sometimes a man just wants to work with his hands and be useful. I've got experience in kitchens, and I promise I won't get in your way." There was something in the stranger's tone that made Mike pause. Maybe it was the sincerity, or maybe it was the fact that he was clearly struggling to handle the lunch rush alone. Either way, Mike found himself considering the offer more seriously than he should have. "I don't even know your name," Mike said. The man extended his hand with a firm grip. "Name's George. George Smith. And you are?" "Mike Callahan. This is my place." Mike shook the offered hand, noting the calluses that spoke of years of honest work. "You sure you want to spend your day working in a food truck for free?" George nodded, already rolling up his sleeves. "Absolutely sure. Point me in the right direction, and let's see what we can accomplish together." Mike hesitated for another moment, then gestured toward the hand-washing station. "Well, if you're serious about this, you'll need to wash up first. Health department rules and all that." As George moved to clean his hands, Mike couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this stranger than met the eye. The way he carried himself, the confidence in his voice, even the quality of his boots, everything suggested this wasn't just some random drifter looking to kill time. "You said you have kitchen experience?" Mike asked, handing George a clean apron. "More than you might think," George replied, tying the apron around his waist with practiced ease. "I've worked in all kinds of places over the years, big kitchens, small kitchens, outdoor setups like this one. Food is food, and people are people no matter where you serve them." The lunch rush started earlier than usual, and Mike was grateful for the extra hands. George moved around the small space like he had been working there for months, never getting in Mike's way, and somehow always knowing exactly what needed to be done next. When Mike was grilling burgers, George was prepping vegetables. When orders started backing up, George smoothly took over the register, handling customers with a natural charm that Mike envied. "You sure you haven't worked in a food truck before?" Mike asked during a brief lull around 1 o'clock. George chuckled, flipping a burger with expert precision. "Let's just say I've served my share of hungry people over the years. Different venues, same basic principle. Make good food, treat people right, and everything else takes care of itself." What impressed Mike most wasn't George's kitchen skills, though those were undeniable. It was the way he connected with every single customer who approached the window. With Mrs. Patterson, he asked about her grandchildren by name, somehow knowing they had just started school. With teenage Jake Morrison, he talked about football and asked how the high school team was looking this season. With elderly Mr. Franklin, he discussed the weather and complained good-naturedly about his aching joints in a way that made the old man laugh for the first time in weeks. "How do you know all these people?" Mike finally asked when they had a moment to breathe. George wiped down the counter with methodical care. "Small towns are pretty much the same everywhere, Mike. People want to be seen, want to be heard, want to know that someone cares about their story. It doesn't take much to make someone's day a little brighter." Around 2:30, a customer ordered a pulled pork sandwich and asked if they could turn on some music while he waited. Mike reached for his small radio and tuned it to the local country station. The opening notes of Amarillo by Morning filled the air, and Mike felt his shoulders relax for the first time all day. "Now that's real music," Mike said, ladling barbecue sauce onto the sandwich. "George Strait, that man's a living legend. I must have listened to this song 1,000 times growing up." George continued working, but Mike noticed his movements had become more deliberate, more focused. "Good song," George said simply. "Good song." Mike laughed. "Brother, that's not just a good song, that's poetry. George Strait doesn't just sing about country life, he lives it. Every word comes from the heart. You know, when I was 15, this song made me want to learn guitar. Never got very good at it, but I still pick it up sometimes when I need to think." The customer paid for his sandwich and walked away, humming the melody. Mike turned up the radio slightly, letting the music fill the truck. "My wife Sarah and we had our first dance to The Chair at our wedding reception, 12 years ago next month. Man, those were simpler times." George glanced up from the onions he was dicing. 12 years is a good run for any marriage. You two must have something special." Mike's expression grew serious. "We do. That's what makes all this so hard." He gestured around the truck. "Sarah's been sick, you know, rheumatoid arthritis. The aggressive kind that requires all these expensive treatments. Our insurance helps, but the co-pays are killing us. Some nights I lie awake wondering how I'm going to keep this truck running." and take care of her medical bills at the same time. "That's a heavy load for one man to carry," George said quietly. "It is, but what choice do I have? Sarah worked as a teacher's aide before she got sick. Loved those kids like they were her own. Now some days she can barely get out of bed because of the pain. The medication helps, but it's not cheap, and the side effects—" Mike trailed off, realizing he was sharing more with this stranger than he had with most of his friends. George continued working in silence for a moment, then said, "Sounds like you've got a good woman there, someone worth fighting for." "The best," Mike agreed. "That's why I can't give up on this place. It's not just about the truck anymore. It's about keeping our family together, keeping hope alive. Some days the only thing that gets me through is putting on George Strait and remembering that if he can sing about overcoming hardship, maybe I can live through mine." The afternoon continued with steady business, busier than Mike had seen. In weeks, George seemed to have a magic touch with customers. People who usually ordered small meals were upgrading to larger portions, and several customers mentioned they would be bringing friends by later in the week. By 4 o'clock, they had served more meals than Mike typically served in an entire day. "I don't know what you're doing different," Mike said, counting the money in the register, "but we've had our best day in months. Maybe you're some kind of good luck charm." George smiled, but there was something almost sad about it. Sometimes people just need to know that someone believes in what they're doing. "You've got something special here, Mike. Good food, honest work, a man trying to take care of his family the right way. That resonates with folks." As the day wound down, Mike found himself watching George more carefully. There was something familiar about the way he moved, the way he hummed along with the country songs on the radio, even the way he told stories. When George mentioned growing up on a ranch in South Texas, Mike felt a spark of recognition that he couldn't quite place. "You ever think about performing?" Mike asked suddenly. "You've got a good voice. I heard you humming along with that Strait song earlier, and you sounded just like—" George looked up sharply. "Just like what?" Mike shook his head, feeling foolish. "Nothing. Just reminded me of someone, I guess. Probably just the radio, making me imagine things." The sun was starting to set over Cedar Falls, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples that made the small town look like something from a postcard. Mike began cleaning the grill while George organized the prep area with an efficiency that spoke of years of practice. They worked in comfortable silence, both men lost in their own thoughts. "Mike," George said finally, "can I ask you something personal? After the day we've had, fire away. If money wasn't an issue, if all your bills were paid and Sarah's treatment was covered, what would you want to do with this place?" Mike paused in his cleaning, considering the question seriously. "I'd want to expand, maybe get a permanent location. Not anything fancy, just a small restaurant where families could come and feel welcome. Sarah always talked about having live music on Friday nights, maybe featuring local musicians who need a place to perform. She said food and music go together like Texas and country music," George suggested. "Exactly." Mike smiled at the memory. "She used to say that a good meal could feed the body, but the right song could feed the soul. Put them together, in the right atmosphere, and you've got something magical." George nodded thoughtfully. "Your wife sounds like a wise woman." "She is. I just wish I could give her the life she deserves, instead of worrying about whether we can afford her next doctor's appointment." The radio had been playing softly in the background all afternoon, a steady stream of country classics that provided the perfect soundtrack to their work. As they finished cleaning up, "The Chair" began to play, the same song Mike had mentioned as his wedding dance with Sarah. "Turn that up," George said quietly. Mike reached for the radio and increased the volume. The familiar opening notes filled the truck, and Mike found himself transported back to that magical night 12 years ago when he and Sarah had swayed together on the dance floor, young and in love, and certain that the future held nothing but happiness. George began to hum along, then quietly started singing the words. His voice was rich and smooth, with perfect pitch and an emotional depth that made Mike's skin break out in goosebumps. It wasn't just that George knew every word. It was the way he sang them, with the same phrasing, the same subtle inflections, the same heart-wrenching sincerity that made the original so powerful. Mike stopped cleaning and stared at George, his mind racing, the voice, the mannerisms, the way George seemed to know every detail about small-town Texas life, his familiarity with ranch work, even the quality of his boots and the way he carried himself. It all suddenly clicked into place, like pieces of a puzzle that had been scattered across his consciousness all day. "Oh my God," Mike whispered, the cleaning rag falling from his suddenly nerveless fingers. George stopped singing and looked up, his expression carefully neutral. "Something wrong, Mike?" Mike's heart was pounding so hard he could hear it in his ears. He stared at George's face, really seeing it for the first time, without the distraction of work and conversation. The bone structure, the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, even the way he stood with one hip cocked slightly to the side. It was all achingly familiar from album covers and concert videos Mike had watched 100 times. Mike started, then stopped, shaking his head. "No, that's impossible. You can't be." George removed his sunglasses and set them on the counter, revealing eyes that Mike had seen gazing out from posters on his bedroom wall as a teenager. "Can't be who, son?" Mike sat down heavily on the small stool behind the register, his legs suddenly unable to support him. "George Strait. You're George Strait." The words came out as barely a whisper, as if saying them too loudly might break whatever spell had brought the king of country music to his humble food truck. George smiled that famous smile, the one that had charmed audiences for decades. "Well, I was wondering when you were going to figure that out. Thought maybe I'd lost my touch at blending in." "But why?" Mike's voice cracked like a teenager's. "Why are you here? Why did you spend the entire day working in my food truck? This doesn't make any sense." George leaned against the counter, his posture relaxed but his eyes serious. "It makes perfect sense to me, Mike. I'm in town for a benefit concert tomorrow night at the high school auditorium. Small venue, intimate setting, just me and my guitar raising money for the Children's Hospital in Austin. My tour manager mentioned there was a food truck owner in town who was having some troubles, and I got curious." Mike felt tears forming in his eyes. "So this was what, Charity? You felt sorry for the poor, struggling business owner?" "No," George said firmly. "This was about remembering where I came from and connecting with real people living real lives. Do you know how long it's been since I've just worked alongside someone without cameras or crowds or people wanting something from me? Today was one of the best days I've had in years." The emotion in George's voice was unmistakable, and Mike realized that this legendary performer was being completely sincere. "But you could have just sent money or had your people help. You didn't have to spend your day cooking burgers and washing dishes." George chuckled. "Money's easy, Mike. Anyone can write a check, but working beside someone, hearing their story, understanding their struggles, that's what makes the connection real. Besides, I needed this as much as you did." "What do you mean?" George was quiet for a long moment, gazing out at the Texas sunset. "When you've been performing for as long as I have, sometimes you start to feel disconnected from the people your music is supposed to touch. The audiences get bigger, the venues get fancier, and somewhere along the way you can lose sight of why you started singing in the first place. Today reminded me." Mike wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. "Your music has gotten me through some of the hardest times in my life. When Sarah and I were struggling to have kids, when I lost my job, when she got diagnosed, your songs were always there. They made me feel like someone understood what I was going through." "That's exactly what I needed to hear," George said softly. That's why I do what I do. By now, word had begun to spread through Cedar Falls that something unusual was happening at the Texas Tastes food truck. Mike could see people gathering across the street, pointing and talking excitedly on their phones. A few brave souls had ventured closer, but were keeping a respectful distance. "Looks like our secret's out," George observed with amusement. Mike looked around at the growing crowd and felt a moment of panic. "I'm sorry, I don't know how to handle this. I've never had a celebrity in my food truck before. I don't want you to be uncomfortable." George stood up and adjusted his hat. "Mike, I've been performing for crowds my whole career. A few curious neighbors don't bother me. What matters is that you and I had the chance to work together and get to know each other. That's worth more than any amount of privacy." A middle-aged woman approached the service window hesitantly. Mike recognized her as Janet Thompson, who worked at the local bank. "Excuse me," she said nervously, "but is it true that George Strait is really here?" George stepped up to the window with that easy grace that had made him a star. "Yes, ma'am, I'm here. Just spending some time with my new friend Mike and getting to know your beautiful town." Janet's eyes went wide. "Oh, my lord, it really is you. My husband is never going to believe this. We've been to 12 of your concerts over the years. Could I possibly get a picture?" "Of course," George said graciously, "but only if Mike's in it too. He's the real star here, been feeding this community with love and dedication every single day." As Janet fumbled with her phone camera, more people began approaching. Word was spreading through social media and text messages, and soon there was a genuine crowd gathered around the food truck. George handled each interaction with patience and genuine warmth, signing autographs, taking pictures, and asking people about their lives with the same interest he had shown Mike's customers all day. "This is incredible," Mike said, watching his childhood hero treat each fan like they were the most important person in the world. "You don't have to do all this." "Yes, I do," George replied between autographs. "These people support my music, buy my albums, come to my shows. Without them, I'm just a guy with a guitar. This is the least I can do to show my appreciation." A teenage boy pushed through the crowd, clutching a worn guitar case. "Mr. Strait," he said breathlessly, "I've been learning your songs on guitar. Could you possibly?" George noticed the guitar case and smiled. "You want to play something together?" The boy nodded eagerly, and George gestured for him to come around to the side of the truck where there was more space. As the teenager tuned his guitar with shaking hands, George began talking to him about music, asking about his influences and how long he'd been playing. "What's your name, son?" "Tyler. Tyler Morrison. I'm 17, and I want to be a country singer more than anything in the world." George nodded seriously. "Well, Tyler Morrison, the most important thing about being a country singer isn't having a perfect voice or being the best guitar player. It's about having something real to say and meaning every word you sing. You think you've got that?" Tyler nodded vigorously. "Yes, sir, I do." "Then let's hear what you've got." Tyler began playing, his voice trembling at first, but growing stronger as he gained confidence. He performed one of George's most beloved songs, and while his technique wasn't perfect, there was genuine emotion in every note. The crowd fell silent, captivated by the moment they were witnessing. When Tyler finished, George clapped along with everyone else. "That was real fine playing, Tyler. Keep working at it, and don't let anyone tell you that your dreams are too big. Some of the best country music comes from small Texas towns, just like this one." Mike watched the entire scene with tears streaming down his face. Not only had his hero worked alongside him all day, but now he was inspiring the next generation of musicians right there in Mike's little corner of the world. It was more than he could have ever imagined. As the impromptu concert ended and the crowd began to disperse, promising to spread the word about the next day's benefit show, George turned back to Mike. I suppose I should be getting back to my hotel. Early day tomorrow with sound checks and all that. Mike felt a sudden panic at the thought of this magical day ending. George, I don't know how to thank you. This has been the most incredible day of my life. But more than that, you've given me hope again. I was ready to give up on everything, and somehow you showed up right when I needed it most. George pulled off his apron and hung it neatly on the hook where he'd found it that morning. Mike, I want you to listen to me carefully. You were never going to give up. I could see it in your eyes from the moment I met you. You're a fighter, and you've got something worth fighting for. Today just reminded you of that. But the bills, the medical expenses, the truck payment. George held up his hand. One day at a time, son. You've got a community here that believes in you, a wife who loves you, and a business that can succeed if you keep believing in yourself. Sometimes that's all the foundation a man needs to build something great. As George prepared to leave, he paused and looked back at Mike. One more time. You know, I'm doing that benefit concert tomorrow night, but I was thinking it might be nice to have some good food available for folks. You interested in catering the event? Mike's eyes widened. Are you serious? Dead serious. Fair pay. And I guarantee you'll have more customers than you can handle. Plus, Sarah might enjoy hearing some live music. Think she'd be up for it? Mike could barely speak through his emotions. She would love it. George, you don't understand what this means to our family. I understand more than you think, George said, extending his hand for one final handshake. I'll have my people call you tomorrow morning with the details. And Mike? Yes, sir? Today wasn't charity. Today was friendship. There's a difference, and I hope you know that. As George walked away into the Texas evening, tipping his hat to the lingering crowd members, Mike stood alone in his food truck and tried to process everything that had happened. The greatest country music star in the world had spent an entire day working beside him, had heard his story, had offered practical help, and most importantly had reminded him that he wasn't alone in his struggles. Mike pulled out his phone to call Sarah, knowing she would never believe what he was about to tell her, but needing to share this incredible day with the woman he loved more than life itself. Sarah, honey, you're not going to believe what happened. Today, Mike said when she answered, his voice still shaking with emotion. Mike, you sound strange. Are you okay? Did something happen with the truck? Mike laughed, a sound filled with joy and disbelief. Something happened, all right, but not what you're thinking. Sarah, George Strait, worked in our food truck today. The actual real George Strait spent the entire day helping me serve customers. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Mike, are you feeling all right? Did you hit your head or something? I know it sounds crazy, but I swear to you it's true. He showed up this morning calling himself George Smith, worked all day without asking for a penny, and then revealed who he really was when he started singing along to The Chair on the radio. Sarah, he knew every word, every note, because it's his song. Sarah's voice grew concerned. Honey, you've been under so much stress lately. Maybe you should come home and rest. We can talk about this when you get here. Mike understood her skepticism. If someone had told him this story yesterday, he would have recommended they see a doctor. Sarah, I need you to check social media. Search for Cedar Falls or Texas Tastes or George Strait. People were taking pictures and posting videos. You'll see for yourself. He could hear Sarah moving around, presumably looking for her tablet. After a few moments, she gasped. Oh my God, Mike, there's a video on Facebook of you and George Strait standing together outside the food truck, and another one of him playing guitar with some teenager. This is real as it gets. And Sarah, there's more. He asked us to cater his benefit concert tomorrow night at the high school. He wants you to come hear the show. He said you might enjoy some live music. Sarah began crying, and Mike could hear the emotion through the phone. Mike, how is this possible? We were at rock bottom this morning, and now, I don't know how it's possible, but it happened. George told me that sometimes when you need help the most, it shows up in ways you never expect. He also said something else, Sarah. He said this wasn't charity, it was friendship. When Mike arrived home an hour later, he found Sarah waiting for him in the living room, her tablet open to dozens of social media posts about the day's events. Her eyes were red from crying, but she was smiling brighter than he had seen her smile in months. "Show me everything," she said, patting the couch beside her. They spent the next 2 hours going through photos and videos that people had posted online. Mike was amazed at how many different angles captured the afternoon's events. There was Tyler Morrison playing guitar with George, Janet Thompson getting her picture taken, and dozens of shots of George working behind the counter of the food truck like he belonged there. "Look at this one," Sarah said, showing Mike a video someone had taken from across the street. "You can see him teaching you how to flip burgers a different way. He's really working, not just posing for pictures." Mike watched himself on the small screen, remembering that exact moment when George had shown him a technique for getting more even heat distribution on the grill. At the time, it had seemed like helpful advice from an experienced cook. Now, knowing who George really was, it felt surreal. "And this caption," Sarah continued, reading from another post. Martha Henderson wrote, "George Strait spent 5 minutes asking about my grandchildren and remembered that little Emma just started kindergarten. He's exactly as kind and genuine as you'd hope a real country legend would be. Mike, he touched every single person he met today." The next morning arrived with a phone call at 7:30 sharp. Mike answered to find himself speaking with Linda Martinez, who identified herself as George Strait's tour manager. "Mr. Callahan, I understand you'll be providing catering services for tonight's benefit concert. I wanted to go over the details with you." Mike grabbed a pen and paper, his hands trembling slightly. Even dealing with George's staff felt surreal. "Yes, ma'am, whatever you need. We're expecting approximately 400 people for the show. Mr. Strait suggested a menu of your signature items, maybe burgers, barbecue sandwiches, and sides. Does that work for you?" Mike did quick math in his head. 400 people would represent more business than he typically did in a month. "That works perfectly. What time do you need us there?" "Setup starts at 4 o'clock. The show begins at 7:30. But we'll want food available starting at 6 for early arrivals. Mr. Strait also specifically requested that you and your wife be his guests for the concert after the dinner service." "UD." When Mike hung up the phone, he realized his hands were shaking. Sarah looked at him with concern. "What did they say?" 400 people, Sarah. 400 people are going to eat food from our truck tonight. And George wants us to be his guests for the concert afterward." Sarah stood up from the kitchen table, moving more easily than she had in weeks. "Then we better get to work. What do we need to buy?" They spent the morning shopping for supplies, using money from the previous day's unexpectedly large sales. Mike had never bought ingredients in such quantities, and Sarah insisted on coming along despite her usual fatigue. Her excitement seemed to be energizing her in ways that her medication couldn't. At the grocery store, people kept recognizing Mike from the social media posts. Complete strangers approached to congratulate him and ask about meeting George Strait. Mrs. Davidson from the post office told him she had already bought tickets to the concert specifically because she heard the Texas Tastes truck would be there. "You're famous now, Mike," Sarah teased as they loaded groceries into the car. "How does it feel to be a celebrity chef?" Mike laughed, but there was truth in what she said. The attention was overwhelming, but in the best possible way. For the first time in months, people were associating his name with success rather than struggle. Back at the food truck, they worked together to prep for the evening. Sarah hadn't been able to help with the business in months due to her condition, but today she insisted on chopping vegetables and organizing supplies. Mike watched her work, marveling at how much stronger she seemed when she had something positive to focus on. "You know what I keep thinking about?" Sarah said as she sliced onions. "Yesterday morning, you left the house looking like you were carrying the weight of the world. Tonight, we're catering a concert for George Strait. If someone had told me this story, I would have said they were making it up." Mike paused in his burger patty preparation. "Sarah, there's something George said that I keep thinking about. He told me that I was never going to give up anyway, that he could see it in my eyes. Do you think that's true?" Sarah set down her knife and looked at her husband seriously. "Mike, I've watched you fight for our family every single day. For the past 6 months, even when the bills kept coming and my medical expenses kept growing and it seemed like everything was falling apart, you never once suggested that we should quit. Not once. George Strait didn't save us yesterday. He just reminded us that we were already saving ourselves." As the afternoon progressed, Mike's phone rang constantly with orders from people who wanted to hire the Texas Tastes truck for their own events. Word of the George Strait connection had spread far beyond Cedar Falls, and suddenly everyone wanted to taste the food that had impressed the king of country music. "We're going to need a calendar just to keep track of all these bookings," Sarah said, writing down details from yet another potential catering job. At 3:30, they loaded the truck and headed to the high school. Mike had driven past the building countless times over the years, but today it looked different somehow. More important, more significant. A temporary stage had been set up in the gymnasium, and crew members were running sound checks and adjusting lighting. George appeared as they were setting up the food service area, wearing jeans and a simple button-down shirt, looking exactly like the George Smith who had worked beside Mike the day before. "How are my favorite food truck operators doing today?" he asked with a grin. "Nervous," Mike admitted. "I've never cooked for 400 people at once." "You'll do fine," George assured him. "Just remember, it's the same food you've been making all along. The only difference is the size of the crowd." Sarah approached them, moving carefully but with obvious determination. "Mr. Strait, I'm Sarah Callahan. I can't thank you enough for what you've done for our family." George removed his hat and took Sarah's hand gently. "Mrs. Callahan, the pleasure is all mine. Mike told me about some of the challenges you've been facing, and I want you to know that your strength and grace in dealing with them is truly inspiring." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "I don't feel very strong most days." "The strongest people rarely do," George replied. "But strength isn't about feeling powerful. It's about getting up every morning and facing whatever comes your way with dignity and love. From what I can see, you've been doing exactly that." As the dinner service began, Mike and Sarah worked together with a rhythm they hadn't shared in months. The crowd was enthusiastic and patient, and many people stopped to share their own stories about how George Strait's music had touched their lives. Mike realized that he and Sarah weren't just serving food, they were part of something larger, a community celebration that brought people together through music and shared experiences. Tyler Morrison appeared in line with his entire family, beaming with pride as he introduced his parents to Mike. "This is the man who was there when I got to play with George Strait," he told them. "He's part of country music history now." Around 8 o'clock, as the dinner service wound down and people moved into the gymnasium for the concert, George stopped by the food truck one more time. "You two did incredible work tonight," he said. "I heard nothing but compliments about the food." Mike looked around at the empty serving containers and the satisfied customers heading toward the concert. "George, I still can't believe this is real. 2 days ago, I was ready to lose everything. Tonight, we've got more catering bookings than we can handle, and enough money to cover Sarah's medical bills for the next 3 months. George smiled, but his expression grew serious. "Mike, what happened these past 2 days wasn't magic. It was the result of years of hard work, dedication, and refusing to give up on what matters most. I just helped shine a light on what was already there. But why us? Why did you choose to help our family? George was quiet for a moment, looking out at the crowds of people heading into the concert. Because sometimes when you've been blessed with success, the most important thing you can do is remember where you came from and help someone else along the way. But more than that, working with you reminded me why I fell in love with music in the first place. It's about connecting with real people living real lives. As George prepared to go perform, he turned back to Mike and Sarah one final time. I want you both to know that this isn't goodbye. I'll be back through this area on tour, and I expect to see that permanent restaurant location you told me about. Don't let this momentum stop here. Use it to build something even bigger. Mike and Sarah made their way into the gymnasium, where George had reserved 2 seats in the front row. As the lights dimmed and George Strait walked onto the stage with just his guitar, Mike reached for Sarah's hand and squeezed it tightly. The intimate setting was perfect for George's acoustic performance. Without the elaborate production of his arena shows, every word, every note carried deeper meaning. When he opened with Amarillo by Morning, Mike felt tears forming in his eyes as he remembered hearing George humming that same song while working beside him just 24 hours earlier. "Good evening, Cedar Falls," George said into the microphone, his voice warm and conversational. "Before we get started tonight, I want to tell you about something special that happened to me yesterday. I had the privilege of working alongside one of the finest men I've ever met, right here in your community." George's eyes found Mike and Sarah in the front row. Mike Callahan runs a food truck called Texas Tastes, and yesterday he welcomed a stranger into his business and treated him like family. Mike represents everything good about small-town Texas: hard work, integrity, and the kind of heart that makes this country great. Mike and Sarah, would you stand up so everyone can see? You? Mike felt his face flush red as he and Sarah stood up. The entire audience burst into applause, and people began standing up throughout the gymnasium. The ovation lasted for nearly a minute, and Mike could see tears in Sarah's eyes as she waved to the crowd. Now, I want to dedicate this next song to Mike and Sarah and to everyone here tonight who knows what it means to fight for family, George continued. This is The Chair, and it's about love that lasts through good times and bad. As George began the song that had been Mike and Sarah's wedding dance, Sarah leaned over and whispered, "Dance with me." "Here? In front of everyone?" "Especially here, in front of everyone." Mike stood up and extended his hand to his wife. Sarah took it, and they began swaying together right there in the front row. Other couples throughout the audience began joining them, and soon the entire gymnasium was filled with people dancing to the song that had brought Mike and Sarah together 12 years earlier. George noticed what was happening and smiled, his voice growing even more tender as he sang. When the song ended, he looked directly at Mike and Sarah and said, "That's what it's all about right there, folks. That's what makes all the music worthwhile." The concert continued for another hour, with George sharing stories between songs and creating an atmosphere that felt more like a gathering of friends than a formal performance. When he performed "Give It Away," he talked about the importance of generosity and community support. During "I Cross My Heart," he spoke about the power of commitment and staying true to the people who matter most. As the evening wound down, George stood up from his stool and set his guitar aside. "I want to close tonight with something a little different. Yesterday, I met a young man named Tyler Morrison who has dreams of being a country singer. Tyler, are you out there?" Tyler stood up from his seat in the middle section, his face bright red with embarrassment and excitement. "Yes, sir, I'm here." "Well, come on up here, son. Let's show these folks what the next generation of country music sounds like." Tyler made his way to the stage, his guitar case in hand, while the audience cheered encouragingly. George helped him get set up, and then stepped back to give him the spotlight. "Take your time. George said quietly. Just sing from your heart. Tyler began playing, his voice stronger and more confident than it had been the day before. He performed an original song he had written about small-town life and big dreams, and the audience was completely captivated. When he finished, the standing ovation was thunderous. George put his arm around Tyler's shoulders. "Ladies and gentlemen, you just heard the future of country music, Tyler Morrison. Remember that name." As Tyler returned to his seat, overwhelmed with emotion, George picked up his guitar one final time. "I want to end tonight with a song that reminds us that no matter how far we travel or how much success we achieve, home is always where the heart is. This is Heartland, and it's for everyone who knows that the best things in life aren't things at all. They're the people who love us and stand by us through everything." The final song was deeply moving, and when George finished, the entire audience remained on their feet for several minutes, not wanting the evening to end. George bowed deeply, his own eyes moist with emotion. "Thank you, Cedar Falls. Thank you for reminding me why I fell in love with music in the first place. And thank you for showing me that the best performances happen when we're all just being ourselves." After the concert, George invited Mike and Sarah backstage to his makeshift dressing room in the school's band room. The three of them sat together, on folding chairs, still processing the magic of the evening. "George, I don't know how we'll ever repay you for what you've done for us," Mike said. George shook his head. "Mike, you've already repaid me more than you know. These past 2 days have been exactly what I needed to reconnect with my purpose. You reminded me that music isn't about filling arenas or selling records. It's about touching people's lives and bringing communities together." Sarah spoke up, her voice thick with emotion. "What you've given us isn't just financial help, though that means everything. You've given us hope again. You've shown us that we're not alone in our struggles, and that there are still good people in this world who care about each other." "The good people were always there, Sarah. Sometimes we just need someone to help us see them clearly." Now Mike leaned forward in his chair. "George, there's something I need to ask you. This whole experience, it's changed everything for us. But I keep wondering, what happens now? The publicity will die down, the bookings will slow down, and we'll be back to our regular lives. How do we make sure we don't waste this opportunity?" George smiled, recognizing the wisdom in Mike's question. "The secret is understanding that this opportunity isn't about me or about the publicity. It's about the quality of what you do and the heart you put into it. People didn't come to your truck yesterday because George Strait was there. They came back because the food was good and you treated them right. That's what will sustain you long after this week is forgotten." "But what about the expansion, the permanent location? Those were Sarah's dreams, but they seem so big now." "Dreams are supposed to be big, Mike, but you don't have to achieve them all at once. Take the momentum from this week and use it to take one step forward, then another, then another. Before you know it, you'll be exactly where you're supposed to be." Sarah nodded thoughtfully. "I think I understand. This isn't a fairy tale where everything magically becomes perfect. It's a beginning, a chance to build something real and lasting." "Exactly," George agreed. "And remember, success isn't just about money or expansion. Success is about doing work that matters, taking care of the people you love, and making a positive difference in your community. By that measure, you two were already successful before I ever showed up." As they prepared to leave, George handed Mike a business card. "This is my personal assistant's number. I want you to call her in 6 months and let her know how things are going. And Mike," "Yes, sir, when you do open that permanent location, I want to be your first customer. Not as George Strait the entertainer, but as George the friend who believes in what you're doing." Mike and Sarah drove home in comfortable silence, both lost in thought about the incredible transformation their lives had undergone in just 48 hours. The truck was fully stocked with leftover food from the catering job. They had a stack of business cards from potential customers, and most importantly, they had renewed faith in their ability to overcome whatever challenges lay ahead. "Pull over," Sarah said suddenly, as they drove past the spot where Mike parked the food truck every day. Mike pulled into the familiar space and turned off the engine. They sat together in the truck, looking out at the small Texas town that had always been their home, but somehow felt different now. "What are you thinking about?" Mike asked. "I'm thinking about how George was right. We weren't waiting for someone to save us. We were already saving ourselves. Every day you got up and went to work, every time you refused to give up, every moment you chose to keep fighting for our family. That was us writing our own story." Mike reached over and took Sarah's hand. "And you were fighting too, Sarah. Fighting the pain, fighting the fear, fighting to stay positive when everything seemed hopeless. We were in this together the whole time." "So what happens now?" Sarah asked, echoing Mike's earlier question to George. Mike was quiet for a long moment, then smiled. "Now we keep doing what we've always done, but with a little more confidence and a lot more hope. We serve good food, we treat people right, and we build something that makes our community better. And maybe in a few years, when we're ready, we take that next step toward the restaurant. Maybe we do. But for now, this is perfect. This truck, this town, this life we're building together, it's exactly what we need." 3 months later, Mike was prepping for the lunch rush when a familiar figure approached the food truck. George Strait, without disguise this time, walked up to the service window with a big smile on his face. "I was in the area and thought I'd stop by for lunch," he said. "How's business been?" Mike grinned, gesturing to the line of customers already forming behind George. "See for yourself. We've been booked solid for catering jobs. Sarah's feeling better, and we've even started putting aside money for that permanent location." "That's fantastic news. What's the special today?" "For you, everything's on the house." George laughed and shook his head. "Mike, we've been through this. I'm paying for my lunch just like everyone else. That's what friends do." As George waited for his order, chatting with other customers like he belonged there, Mike realized that the most important thing he had gained from their encounter wasn't the business success or the financial stability. It was the knowledge that even in the darkest moments, when everything seems hopeless, unexpected grace can appear in the most ordinary places. The king of country music had taught him that the most powerful transformations don't happen because of grand gestures or miraculous interventions. They happen because people choose to show up for each other, to work side by side, and to believe that everyone has a story worth hearing and a dream worth supporting. Mike handed George his lunch and watched as the man who had changed his life walked away. Just another customer in a small Texas town, carrying with him the quiet satisfaction of knowing that sometimes the best performances happen not on stage, but in the simple act of being present for another human being. The Texas sun was shining bright, the food truck was busy, and Mike Callahan was exactly where he belonged, serving his community, loving his family, and building a life that mattered. One meal at a time,